once you've got your project underway, you start to collect data. Do you have to accept that there'll be a period of time where it's still learning and collecting before you can actually start using it for real-time decision making?
I think it will again be on the case. So what the digital twins is intending to do. So for example, if we take a case of where a digital twin is looking to optimize timetables on a rail, obviously there's a big human risk in that equation. So you won't be able to just install something that is predicting and operating from day one. You'll have to look at what are the indicators over time, etc. But one thing to keep in mind is across sectors, we've been collating data for decades. The data exists, and it may not be, for example, in the way it was captured of the highest quality, but we have data from many different sectors over many different years. There is an advantage in leveraging that existing data and looking what we've captured over time and seeing how can we use that so that our insights are accurate and reliable. And I think there is a characteristic of data which is often missed, but increasingly with the use of digital twins is back to the front, is reusability of data. And I think this, in linking to the question earlier, in terms of how much do you invest, how much does it cost, for example, to work in digital twins, and how much value you get out of it. I think reusability is key, because if you're approaching it with a mindset of you want to connect that data to as many useful use cases as possible, to as many digital twins as possible, you are adding value to what you already have, which is why the investment in a digital twins is minimum compared to how much you open up for other, in terms of other value opportunities to add value to your business.
That being collaborative and using past insights, you are starting to see what I would call exchanges. So you go for, let's keep it very simple, you're going to put a railway line from A to B and it's X number of kilometers, your forecast cost and time period is Y. Actually, then when you compare it to other projects globally or regionally, is, well, actually, how close to the mark are you? There's always going to be a plus or minus in the world we live in, but actually it just gives you a very solid insight and forefront to make your calculations on. And that then goes back to the lending criteria of meeting a particular bank that you are going to fall within inside their measured criteria.
Well, I think you're making an interesting point there, because it's possibly one that hasn't been thought about, which is the role that the finance industry will have in shaping how digital twins will be used. I mean, this is something that you're kind of alluding to. So I think maybe we should just ask the question of how will that work?
For me, it's going to be that decision process. We spoke to about 30 banks in total and investors, and there was their mindset of they're using, I won't say they are using digital twins, but they don't call it digital twins. Around their investment criteria, about meeting certain pinch points that they need to actually achieve their goals. So actually, when you look at that sort of starting point, when you approach your credit interview, your credit reference with the bank, if you're able to walk into that meeting and set out your roadmap, it's a digital roadmap, but a roadmap of that asset, it gives confidence to everybody in the room. So that's where you start at day one. And that's where as Alexandra said, that compare and contrast to other projects. And as Peter said, the collaboration and understanding really start to create that bond at the highest and earliest level that'll actually create a route through the whole project and into the asset life that's good for not only the lenders, the insurers, the delivery, but actually the whole built environment itself.
And you talked there about an industry. So from what you're saying and from what I've read, really we're looking at different industries in different countries. They'll be able to use digital twins in different ways, and they'll forge their own path as well.
Yeah. So that hogging that line, like you look at sort of the automotive industry, and what that has achieved, and the way they use digital twins to deliver to now the new modern methods of construction, off-site construction, that lean environment that we come to the forefront. We can learn from both manufacturing and the sort of retail industry as well.
What kind of levels of transparency need to be in place for success here? Because you're talking about governments, private companies, the public.
So we talk about sharing data in a secure and resilient fashion. It's sharing enough data to make the decisions, but no more than that. In 2018, CWB published something called the Gemini Principles, which are really the conscience of digital twins, of data sharing, of digital transformation. There are 9 basic principles, and 3 of them sit under what we would call trust. So there's trust, there's security, and there's openness. And you can see that there's a tension between all those things. If you have a completely open digital twin where all the data is open, there is no security. If you have a completely locked down digital twin, there's no openness. There needs to be a balance, and each individual digital twin will have different views on where that lies. Different countries, different assets. Some are more able to share than others. It's an individual digital twin decision. We feel strongly that the more that can be shared, the better the insights and decisions that will come out of that. But that has to be done, as I say, in a secure and resilient fashion.
This must be more of a challenge where you're talking connected, the ecosystem you talked about, where you have citywide or community-wide or several buildings connected to a digital twin, compared with, say, a company that wants to have a digital twin of a tall tower that it owns.
Where assets are owned by different entities, it's less easy, and one has to have data sharing agreements in place. And as I was talking about, the socio-technical side of this is part of the socio side, and can be, it really needs to be looked at when you're setting up those data sharing agreements to make sure that it's right for everybody who's sharing the data. And yes, if it goes outside an organizational boundary or a regional boundary, a national boundary, a sectoral boundary, there are more things to think about, but it's perfectly doable. There just needs to be that mindset of wanting to be able to share.
Sounds like a huge piece of work, though.
It's one of the reasons why a framework is important. It's not just about making sure that your data is in a sensible format to be shared. It's that we all understand, what do we mean about sharing? How would we do that? So creating a framework for information management is a key part of any ecosystem of connected digital twins.
Does that framework also need to have an agreement in place in terms of terminology, so that everybody is using the same words to mean the same thing?
Absolutely. If somebody's calling it a door and somebody else is calling a portal, that's going to cause confusion in the data. So we need to make sure that we've got our ontologies and our nomenclatures sorted.
Peter, if I can turn to you, and I just want to talk a little bit about risks and security, because with so much information, with personal information and with critical information about infrastructure, that is extremely attractive to people who you don't want to have access to that data.
Yeah. Security is essential when it comes to digital twins. It should be taken from the very start of setting up any digital twin for any organization. It's very important. I think there are many types of controls we can develop when it comes to security. So it could be either a technology security. So how can we use technology to secure the data and the usage of the data? It could be illegal controls. So basically ensuring there are the appropriate data sharing agreements in place, understanding of who's responsible for that data. And I think you touched on it in terms of skills, is the professional controls. So ensuring people who have the appropriate skills are handling the data, because the data is it's a valuable asset for organizations. So it needs to be handled by skilled people, especially if it involves data around personal data. So it involves personal data around, so very confidential data around people, etc. So that should be handled with a completely different type of data controls than another type of data. There are also new types of risks when it comes to a connected ecosystem of data systems or of digital twins. And this is common for any kind of big data setting. When you're bringing data from different sources, you are open to more inference risk. So basically making a deduction based on other sets of data to deduce what's in the data that you don't have access to. So basically filling in the picture just by looking at that asset is connected to that tower station or to that water network, it should be in that location, therefore I can do something not good to it, for example, or something like that. And that is a massive risk, especially when it comes to digital twins, and especially to, when we're talking about cyber physical systems. So when you're using those data systems to manage the physical world, and if we're talking about infrastructure, which has a huge impact on people and cities, so that's a huge risk, obviously. And there is lots of consideration need to be taken here. I think one increasing topic that's being discussed increasingly is around data sovereignty. So where do you host your data? So is it within specific, is it on the cloud? Where does the server sit? Who has access to the data? In case of a war, can you block that data server? What happens in it? So all of these considerations are increasingly front of mind when setting up the cyber security and just physical security consideration for around data systems that are connected to the physical world, like digital twins.
You mentioned data sovereignty, which I was going to ask about, actually. I think that's a huge challenge, particularly in the GCC, this region. And that transparency, I think, is quite hard to overcome in a way, where you're getting different parties working together. Particularly, one of the challenges that I've found companies face here, and I've spoken to quite a few companies who have said the same thing, and really this is more, I suppose, on the vendor side, is how do you encourage governments to start adopting the cloud, or how do you encourage private companies to start adopting the cloud? And it seems like the most likely route to success with the type of digital twin ecosystem that you've been talking about, you're probably going to have to use the cloud.
So there would be lots of consideration when making advice, around these topics. But just maybe a related comment is on the use of cloud and the use of edge servers, etc. It's still a challenge globally. So not just in GCC. So in the UK as well, for example, there's huge consideration being taken what type of data relating to critical national infrastructure can go on the cloud and what shouldn't, or we don't have the confidence yet that it should. So it's a very, very complex topic. And then again, I think touching on that point on when we're connecting between different organizations, so data is being shared across organizational boundaries, and that federation piece. So how do you federate across organizational boundary? Obviously, and how do you integrate that? Obviously is a completely new way to be exposed to risk, because if you have the best team and the best controls on your data, you also have to have confidence that everyone else that has access to your data will have some sort of a minimum level of either certification or minimum level of controls in place. And when it comes to critical national infrastructure, that's obviously you shouldn't be any room for risk in that area.
Mark, this has to be something you're looking at and thinking about.
I think, as Peter eloquently said, it's that level of knowledge acceptance, and also the support you give through them, that you nurture. Once you got the desire, the aspirations, you work with that client to nurture that they feel confident in the steps they're moving forward. And with security being such a very sort of hot topic, especially at the moment, that feeling of confidence needs to be there. it's got to be done at a pace that the client feels comfortable about, and that's where case studies come in. And I think the biggest sort of advocate we've got is our Year in Infrastructure Awards, a Year in Infrastructure book that we produce that gives people the ability to flick through and see, and if they want to even communicate with other projects and delivery teams and clients that have gone ahead and done something that they've done. So with that, it breeds the confidence that's required to deliver the project.
Peter, though, the security you put in place is only as good as the training you give the people. And I'm going to give a really simple example here. And I saw this just last night. So it's a real example I saw last night on YouTube, which is a teacher at a school, and I'm not going to say the name of the school, but it was in this region, doing a video where he was explaining how to use a particular software. And he didn't blur out any children names, any children photos, any parent details. So that video, you could pause it at any point and you could see the name of the children in that school, you could see photos of the children, you could see the parent details. Now, you translate that over to what we're talking about, because obviously that's a slightly different example, but you translate this over now to digital twins. It's, your weakest point is probably going to be the people. So how do you make sure that, what sort of training has to be in place? And how do you make sure that consistently you're rechecking to make sure somebody hasn't done something, probably in all innocence, but that has just opened up a door?
Yeah, so I think training is very important. I think also understanding the responsibilities and understanding, how much can you fail before you have a critical openness. So there are some type, let's say, of data that you can open to risk, but you can sustain a threat to, or something, or an event of exposure to, for example. But it goes back to skills, having the right people, the right training, but also the right understanding of what skills you need, because there are a lot of new technologies emerging and a new governance, not governance from an organizational only perspective, but generally in this shared ecosystems, then there is a need to understand that complexity and have the right skills in place, and have also the recognition that data, you should have responsible people handle it, especially, for example, in this case, personal data is obviously very, very, it's highly confidential data. You shouldn't be sharing it, for example, in this case, without knowing. But accidents happen, so you should have something in place to remedy this events like these, and to ensure training are in place so it doesn't happen in the future.